If you could be born at any time in human history, which age would you choose? The age of kings and empires, the dawn of civilization, the time of discovery, or the age of machines? It sounds romantic, doesn't it? But what if I told you that most of human history was not a story of progress, but of pain? That being born in almost any century before this one meant a life shorter, crueler, and more fragile than you can imagine. You see, we look back at the past with nostalgia. Castles, art, warriors, explorers. But behind every glorious painting, there were people starving in silence. Behind every empire's triumph, there were millions who never even had the right to dream. And if you had been born at the wrong time, which for most of history was almost every time, your life would not be a story, it would be a struggle to simply survive. Imagine opening your eyes for the first time in 10,000 BCE. No cities, no medicine. Just endless wilderness, hunger, and fear. Your tribe lives by hunting, gathering, and luck. If you survive birth, which was never guaranteed, your next enemy is nature itself. A single infection could end your life. A storm could destroy your shelter. An animal could kill you before you even learned its name. Life expectancy? Barely 20 years. Most children never reached adulthood. Every sunrise was a victory. Every night a prayer for tomorrow. But maybe that's too far back. Let's move forward to the age of ancient civilizations. You're born in Mesopotamia, the cradle of humanity, they say. Cities rise from the dust. Writing is invented. Gods are worshipped.
But look closer. You're a peasant. You work from sunrise to dusk in burning heat, growing crops for a ruler who doesn't know your name. You pay taxes in grain, worship gods you fear, and if the harvest fails, your family starves. If you were born a woman, your body is not your own. If you were born poor, your future is already written in the mud beneath your feet. You live, you work, and you die, and no one remembers you ever existed. Now imagine being born in ancient Egypt. Yes, there are pyramids and temples. The gods look down from golden thrones, but you will never see that world up close. You will spend your life carrying stones, mixing mortar, dragging blocks across the desert under the whip of a foreman. The pharaoh will be immortalized in history. You will be dust, forgotten even by your own grandchildren. They'll say you lived in a time of glory, but for you, it was just survival, under the weight of someone else's dream. Maybe you think the Middle Ages were better. Knights, castles, kings. But you're more likely a peasant again. You live in a thatched hut with mud floors, no windows, and no sanitation. The air smells of smoke and sweat and rot. Your teeth fall out by 30. You have 7 children, but only 2 survive. And when plague comes, it takes them too. The Black Death sweeps across continents, wiping out half of Europe. The dead pile faster than the priests can bury them. You pray every night, but even God seems silent. You don't live long enough to see a better age. You die never knowing why it had to be this way.
And yet, as cruel as medieval life was, there was a time even darker. The Age of Conquest. The 15th to 17th centuries. When men sailed across oceans in search of gold and glory, and turned the world into a marketplace of suffering. If you were born in Africa, you could be chained, sold, and shipped across the sea. If you were born in the Americas, you could be wiped out by disease, invasion, or enslavement. If you were born in Europe, your life might still belong to someone else, a lord, a king, or a god you feared more than you loved. The world was expanding, but compassion was shrinking. Millions died for borders that would be redrawn. Empires rose on bones, and the color of your skin could decide whether you were seen as human at all. But even after the Age of Conquest ended, humanity didn't find peace. It found machines. The Industrial Revolution, they called it progress. But for the people living through it, it was hell made of smoke and iron. You're born into a city choked with soot. You start working at 8 years old, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, in a factory that never sleeps. You lose your childhood in the sound of machines. You cough up coal dust before you learn to spell your name. And if you fall sick, there's no doctor, just the cold truth that you're replaceable. Progress had a price, and it was paid by the poor. And then came the 20th century, the age of science, electricity, and freedom, or so it seemed. But this century would also see the worst suffering in recorded history. If you were born between 1900 and 1950, you would live through 2 world wars. If you were unlucky, you would be drafted. If you were Jewish, Roma, disabled, or just born in the wrong country, your name might be erased by genocide. Cities turned to ash. Children hid in ruins. Families vanished overnight. Entire nations learned what it meant to destroy themselves in the name of ideology. By 1945, over 75 million people were dead, and those who survived carried scars, not on their bodies, but in their souls. So, when was the worst time to be born? You could say the Dark Ages. You could say during the plagues. You could say in the shadow of the world wars.
But maybe the truth is simpler. The worst time to be born was any time before we learned to see each other as human. Because for most of history, cruelty wasn't the exception, it was the rule. People were property. Children were labor. Women were possessions. The poor were invisible. And life was just something you tried to survive until death came to relieve you. Even the rich weren't free from fear. Medicine was superstition. Wars could erase entire dynasties overnight. And happiness, the kind we take for granted today, was a rare and fragile gift. We call our ancestors brave, but maybe they were just trapped inside a world that didn't yet know kindness. But here's the twist in this story. For all the horror, all the blood and suffering, humanity never stopped trying. Somewhere in the darkness, someone always lit a candle. A healer tending to the sick, a writer daring to tell the truth, a mother teaching her child compassion in a world that had none. And that's what makes this story human. Because even in the worst times, we found ways to love, to hope, to believe that tomorrow could be better, even when there was no reason to. Now, look at your life today. You have food, medicine, rights, safety, and a world connected by technology. We complain about slow Wi-Fi, but not about dying from infection. We worry about heartbreak, but not hunger. We forget that comfort is the rarest gift history ever gave us. You were born in the safest, healthiest, most peaceful era the human species has ever known. And yet we still carry ancient fears, loneliness, anxiety, emptiness. Maybe the worst time to be born isn't about history. Maybe it's about being born into a world that forgets its lessons. Because comfort without empathy is just another kind of darkness. And forgetting our past is the first step to repeating it. So if you ever find yourself wishing you were born in another time, don't. You're living in the future they dreamed of. You are breathing because someone, somewhere, centuries ago didn't give up. History's pain built your peace. Its silence built your voice. And its mistakes are the reason you get to choose a better way. You don't have to survive the worst time in history. You just have to remember it. So no one ever has to again.